work. So we're gonna, I got a special guest today. Sarah was my internship student last semester. Lindsay's my internship student this semester. So it was kind of cool to watch them pass the baton. So what we'll do is we'll kind of break class up into three phases today. First of all, will be input and advice from students who were literally in your shoes, right? I could see how it's hypocritical for me to give you advice and you're like, dude, you're old and you've been doing this for a long time. Fair enough. So how about some students who just took the class, who just who knows how the tests are done, knows who, or knows how I'm getting about seeing if you remember certain key emphasized pieces of information. And then the second part of class, I'll open it up for general review. You have questions, we have answers. Let's make sure we're on the same page, tightening up, clarifying some things. And then the last part, we'll kind of get into small groups and we'll float around and answer questions on kind of a smaller group area. In case you're shy and you don't want to ask anything out loud, we want to make sure we get all your questions answered. Okay. So Sarah and Lindsay, you guys, y'all are on the clock.
Everyone doesn't know me. So I didn't take this through class, it was like a year ago, but last year professors I helped tutor and help people out with the class. And I think that this test is like the best first test because you really just get like an overview of this textbook. If you have this textbook down and you can understand and analyze the pictures and what he's inferring, then you'll be okay. So what I mean by that is if he's saying like we just need to know flexion, extension, sagittal plane movements, then all you have to analyze is that. But that does not mean like don't be aware of other movements, correct? Is that still the case? Like I said, I feel old, but so I think that just having things down in like kind of like groups, like local and global, have that down, have flexion and extension, sagittal plane movements, have that down, have axes, so that's my right camera, have your axes and your planes like tied together, because they're always going to be together. The sagittal plane will always be about a bilateral axis. It can never be frontal. Does that make sense? And then my last piece of advice is you get scratch work, so use it, you know what I mean? I find often people will go review their tests and they'll be like, no, I swear I knew that, or I meant to put that. And it's like, if you write it down, you're more likely to put the right answer. Like I just said, you're going to see sagittal plane and sagittal axis as two different answer choices. So you might be quick to put an axis when he asks for a plane's name. Does that make sense? So if you write that down, it's more just kind of like a check. So.
And Sarah has gone over exams with students last semester voluntarily as an intern, and Lindsay's going to be doing that this semester. But remember, the answer choices are randomly mixed.
Yeah.
So you might just have bad luck having that first answer, the temptation answer, right? You know, sagittal axis instead of sagittal plane. So you have to don't assume and take your time, not jump to conclusions.
There could also be like 8 multiple choice answers that you choose from. But yeah, with scratch paper, you could also use it to do the little planes and axes with your pencil. I felt like that helped some people recognize what plane that picture was in. And yeah, write things down. If you're a process kind of guy, you could always do like, what position is this picture in, and what position is the second picture in, and then use that to figure out what motion happened. And
would y'all even look at the choices? So like the test is multiple choice, but really it doesn't have to be. It could be fill in the blank. Like if I asked you what's the position of the right shoulder, you don't have to have. I put choices so that we can help score it, but
I actually think
all
that
the questions are
it's better to not look at the answer choices because you're gonna get confused. I think specifically like for the later test, when motions kind of can get jumbled feeling. If you can analyze it before reading the answer choices, you're already knocking out impossible answer choices. And because you're writing it down on this paper at home, so just make sure you don't forget your answer.
no, please.
Another thing that was very important with this test is kind of nomenclature, so position versus motion. How I help people with it
first off, if it's one picture, you can't analyze motion unless you're given more context, right? So if it's one picture, it's typically a position that he's asking for. And you can be positioned ED, so then your answer choice should have an ED on the end. Versus you can't be like motion, right? I mean, you can, but you usually have motion, so your answer choice should be ION. Okay?
Flexion.
Maybe have that, yeah, flexion versus flex. Maybe have that like the top of your paper, because also people will run through this test and I have seen it before that every person knew that, oh, I knew that was flexion, but every time I put flexed. And that is a wrong answer choice, and therefore that they did not get the grade that they thought they were gonna have.
Did
That's
y'all,
very unfortunate.
did y'all process of elimination or you didn't really have to?
If I was stuck,
Gotcha,
Yeah,
gotcha,
right.
gotcha.
well, I know it's that.
Yeah.
So, but also, right and lefts, make sure that you have that down too. Right and lefts can also be a big difference. I've had somebody got the whole test confused, and they pretty much.
Because they're flipped it. So, well, you're looking, the way that you're looking right now at this guy, this is his right,
Mhm.
but to you, that's your left. So a lot of people will take the test in that way. And I know that sounds silly and you're like, oh, that's not gonna be me. Like it happens to like a majority of people, at least on this first test. So you really, in my opinion, I know some people would like flip on their piece of paper, like instead of having right hand corner, they put an L to remember that if they need to flip what they're looking at.
Like a reminder.
Like a reminder, yeah. I would just position my computer for a second and get in the same motion, like in the same direction.
Yeah.
And so I was.
Have you ever done this? Because I've seen people take their laptop or their computer and mirror, because remember, you can become the person you're analyzing,
Right.
but you're not the person you're analyzing. So I've seen that too. That's a very good point.
But make sure if you're trying to imitate what that picture's doing, like if they're like this, make sure that we're not doing this.
Mm.
Right. We have to make sure that we have the right lefts down. Yeah.
Absolutely. What about studying? I know it's tradition. I was in college at one time too, to wait for, the night before. And my pieces of advice, speaking with students for many years, is that that's when things get confusing, because it's trying to learn all these rules in the last minute. And for the test, as I'm telling you, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to be an educator. Someone's going to call me over and say, what do you mean by this? Or what does that mean? Or are you asking this? And I'm just going to read the question, because I don't assume I might have made a mistake. But if it's written the way I want it, I'm going to tell you, I taught you how to answer that. Or if the question's written the way I want it. And I've been tried a lot. I'm pretty good at not giving away information. Okay. So that's why I think it's important to start now. Don't wait till Tuesday night, because that's when things might get jumbled and confused.
Practice is always the best thing. Practice. So I had a little review session last week, and it took them, a few seconds to figure out. And they were like, okay, which way? But if you practice and if you keep on practicing, it'll come quicker.
Absolutely.
So you'll be able to
Just like anything
feel
else.
confident.
Just like anything else. You practice an instrument for the first time. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. But over the course of time, you're like, wow, I was able to change chords. You don't necessarily notice it from 1 minute to the next. But over time, you're like, oh, I'm a lot more efficient at figuring out or seeing position and motion.
I think that with this first test, people probably, this is not your first time hearing these words like flexion and extensions and stuff, so you're overly confident and therefore you don't study. But if you don't study the way that the test will be maybe set up, you're not going to be prepared. So like a lot of people would text me, like they wouldn't want to come to review sessions maybe, but they would just want practice. And I would say, okay, well, hip flexion will be on the test. Google hip flexion or hip flex and get very familiar with that. And whenever, if you get confused on something, like you are the dummy, like you can figure it out there yourself, right? Get into fetal position. No fetal position, because if you get into fetal position, you can look at that joint and say, okay, that's the most flex. It's at the end of its rope for that movement. So if if the wrist looks like this, then in fetal, then this can't be an extended position of my wrist. So you know that would be the answer to this, it has to be.
The wrist is in feeding.
Right.
The wrist is in its feeding.
So it needs most flex.
Don't be afraid to move.
Yeah, well, this will be the test that most people won't, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, you will get into a groove of doing it.
But
Promise.
don't be afraid. In other words, if there is a position on the test, don't be afraid to, you know, as quietly and efficient as you can, get up and try to recreate some of these positions. I mean, feel free to do that.
Yeah, by test 4, we were all in our own space down
Our own
here.
kinesiology
Yeah.
yoga class.
Yeah. And people more comfortable like sitting on the sides or on the back to do that. That's not, I did not just this.
Any other pieces of advice before we open it up for questions? Okay. All right, guys, so reviews are led by the students. So in other words, if you're studying or you're looking over something, you're like, what did you mean by, or I was watching the videos and you said this, can you clarify this? Although I will never answer things like, will I pass? I haven't written the test yet. I definitely can clarify, can I ask? What I mean by that is I'm not going to give you radioulnar joint motions on the test. If you say, can you ask things about radioulnar joint? You're like, no, I'm not asking things about radioulnar joint yet. So I can't clarify what's like fair and what's not fair to ask, but I have no idea what exactly I'm going to ask. An analogy that I keep telling is that in our world of kinesiology, guys, we have to be analytical. You're going to have clients that are all going to be different. We're going to have athletes that are all going to be different. We're going to have patients that are all be slightly different, and you're going to have different tools in your toolkit to be able to figure things out. So even though in class I never exactly say 125,000 minus 4, you know how to add and subtract. So whatever math question I do give you, you do like me, count any fingers, but you know how to figure it out. And I've given you the tools of analyzing human position, change in position, thus the motion, figure it out. To do infinitely many math questions. Who wants to break the ice with our first question?
So the outside of the practice, so I can do like practice that.
What?
Yeah, I really just want to like practice.
I'm gonna put a pin in that, because I'm not afraid to be anybody's dummy. But I do want to open it up in case anybody has some general questions about a plane, an axis, a position, linear, rotational, general, just any of that. I'll be more than happy to do some of that, but I just want for this phase, I just want to make sure nobody goes into the last couple nights of studying with any clarification questions that you might have. So I'm not punting, but it's third down. I don't have to punt yet. Anybody? Any clarification stuff, anything you were looking over or listening to that you're like, why? That's kind of hazy. I'm gonna let you guys, if we get into practice, I'm gonna let you guys run the practice. But,
What about that quiz I made, that like practice thing that we did?
yeah, see if it's on the desktop. It should be, it might be on the desktop. You can tell my ADHD, look at my desktop. Yeah. They had was the PDFs the one spirit was?
I'm hearing to the videos,
Oh.
yes.
Yeah, what you got? That's right. We'll try.
I just want to clarification joints.
Yeah.
I want to spend, but I don't know if meetings over.
Well, so what I did is that was one of the video lectures that I sent you guys to watch. Did you watch those? Okay, so what we did is I gave you the general, how joints are classified based off of. Yeah. What I'm gonna do is once we get into specific joints, I'm gonna be like, hey, the ankle is a uniaxial hinge, The knee is a modified hinge, the hip is a ball and socket, the wrist is a biaxial ellipse joint, the radial ulna is a uniaxial pivot. So knowing not necessarily what all of them are, but knowing that we have rankings based off of articulation of bone with no movement, articulation of bone with a little bit of movement, more than none, but not as much as most. And then the final one is the most of this stuff. Obviously, our attention is on most of this. But it's just knowing at the level of what I said in class or the posted lecture that we have these different classifications based off of movement. This is the one with none, like the sutures and the skull and the pelvis, right? It's like they're when we're young, they're allowed to grow and expand, and then when we stop growing, they get welded shut. Right? There's no motion. So those are, but there's still articulations that they're done. So at least a little bit, most. But it's at that level. It's only at that level. And then as we progress through the material and we go through the diaphragmatic joints, it's like this is a that. This is a this. Did that answer that question? Good question. Anybody else have general questions before we get into some practice? You ready to go?
You want to do a quiz for some practice? Okay, so it's gonna be kind of similar to the test where I think that I have it kind of set for like 2 minutes per question. Because, you know, you can spend all the time in the world on it, but I also don't think you can see your answers until you submit it. It's about the 15 questions, so. This is the code here in the corner. If you go to quizzes, joinmyquiz.com, and then this is the number here in the corner, 073898.
The viewing on this is awful. So I'm gonna move maybe the viewers at home see better. So Sarah, do you mind saying that one more time? If they want to find the quiz, they go to joinmyquiz.com and then 073898.
And I'll fill it out for you.
Okay. Guys, also, it's still open time for questions, clarifications. So while we do these practices, if you have any clarifications on anything, now is the time.
You all ready? Okay, I'm gonna start it.
Guys, everybody's almost done. I'll make a couple of announcements. So for the test, laptops, iPads, but you cannot take your test on your phone, okay? So obviously this is fine for practice and stuff. But come with, it's on the instructions, like on the Moodle, but I'll email it out just to remind you. So make sure you have your charger and things are charged, all that good tech stuff. There's gonna be about 33 questions. So 99 points, and I give everybody a point to get it to 100, okay? So roughly about 33 questions. Anybody have any study groups planned in the lab or anything, or? Body's going solo. It's like East Games. Any alliances? I tell you,
Yeah.
and study groups are the best. If all you do is study with yourself, then how can you check yourself if you're studying the wrong thing? If that makes sense. So that's one of the positives about getting in the groups. Not all the time, but maybe like the last session, because you could be going over something and you're like, whoa, I thought it was this, and kind of find out it wasn't that. And if you don't have someone else there to kind of spot you, sometimes those wrong bits of information can be imprinted in our heads. All you guys.
Is anyone still taking this?
This is why I have interns, because I don't know the difference between like a group me, a group you, a Groupon, a coupon. Oh, yeah, my sound effects. And they think it's sound effects, but it's actually just the arthritis. Joints, clicking. Yeah, I haven't done the freeze rate yet, though.
Oh, it's great.
For
Freeze rate.
I did? No. Freeze rate. It's a good way to bring it, but like we know, when we get into some of these things, you gotta make sure it's freezing. Yeah. All right, ready?
Alright, so, you wanna go ahead? This is basic from the textbook, right? What is a uniaxial hinge joint? Remember that down?
We know unity is one because a hinge joint that has one axis. Then I know the middle of a hinge joint.
That's not on there? Yeah. A hinge is like a door handle, right? Of family?
Yeah.
And so like if you think about the door opening and closing, it's specifically like these ones. That's kind of like our elbow, kind of like our
That should
main
be,
to modify.
it shouldn't mess up the.
Yeah, it won't.
Did I do this?
This one is tricky and a lot of people missed it and people have missed it in the past, because it's saying, what plan are you observing locally?
So this picture is telling you just enough information to where, is this girl standing up? No, she's on the ground. She's horizontal with the ground. So,
So you're not looking at it this way, you're looking at it
you're looking at it now.
and that's how you know that you're local. That's the part of the question that he would say, there's enough there. That global part gives you the idea, what are we all seeing when we see her on the ground like that? What movement?
The transfer.
Transfers.
You know what would be interesting is students who, so you know how some people's devices are rotated up like a screen and some people are flat? It'd be interesting to see if the flat device students
Get that
are
way?
more prone to get it right, because remember, we have to rotate it to see it up, right? So that would be a neat, side question for this.
Does anybody have questions on this one?
So you said it's transfers?
The
It's
ground is the
transfers.
ground for all observers.
So
It's
that
another
it's
easy
just
one.
like, what if you were out looking at her, so on the ground versus what the user transaction?
Like how we're seeing it on here versus on the ground?
Like imagine she's on the ground and you're sitting
Like,
here.
oh, we're not actually looking at her like that, we're looking at her as if she's on the ground.
We know that we're looking at her on the ground because of the snow, right? She can't make a snow angel in there like that. So we know that we're seeing the circle move this way. Instead of-
Like, we'd be taking a picture like this. And then we would just be showing it here. But that's still a global reference because she's laying on the ground, rotating the transfers.
It's kind of like how are they spinning?
Yeah.
If she's on the ground doing a snow angel, then the circle's being made like this. And that's the transverse plane versus if she was doing like jumping jacks, that would be frontal because it's moving this way. Does that make sense?
And notice the subtleties, the transverse, like her transverse or her section or her that's a good tip of perspective.
The room's transverse plane, that's global. Versus if we said local would mean at a specific joint. So it would always be in
What-
this, right?
If you wanted to apply what plane would her motion be happening for her frontal? Very good. Her frontal.
Thank you.
Okay.
What did we always reference position? Position is reference to,
Yes. Anatomical.
and for our first test, motion is reference to fetal. Because remember, we can have flexion to anatomical and flexion from anatomical. But I'm going more into fetal or I'm going less into fetal.
Right, going, motion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. What plane would flexion and extension exist in at the joint's perspective? So I think if I'm right on the textbook, there's this chart that you made, and it's at the end of it, or at least it was for my class. And it was like, I just need you to be familiar with. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. So I would know this pretty well for the test, mainly because you'll be asked about these movements in this way, very straightforward. So if he's saying flexion and extension exist in what plane, it can't be frontal. It just doesn't exist here. It exists in the sagittal plane.
And the key word to Sarah's question and Lindsay's question is the joint's perspective.
Local. Right.
So we can flex and extend in all three global planes, but the elbow can only flex and extend in its sagittal.
So like another question that could be similar to this that could be asked on the test would be like, what plane is abduction in? And that's not something that you learned to analyze yet, but that's fair because it's straight from the textbook, right? Like, I don't want that to be missed just because somebody did a
It's,
thing to look at.
the elbow and knee are both rotating in their section. Same thing.
This is something that I think Dr. Campbell said on our first day, probably 5 times, at least on my first day. So it's engraved in my brain, and I've said it so many times to many people. We do not translate to rotate. We must rotate first in order to translate. And what that means is, I know that you've done this, but again, how I see it, we have to turn the wheel to then propel ourselves forward. Does that make sense? So whenever we have those movements happening at the same time, that's like another term that we have, which would be general motion, like bus wheels. It's moving forward, but it's only moving because we're rotating first. So this is false. This is a really good idea of how a picture might be on the test, an A to a B, or start to finish, right? He got away from left to right because there's a lot of lefts and rights on the test and stuff. But A to B and start to finish, it will be kind of written on the picture. So you, again, don't really need to ask like how it's moving.
So this position in A would be anatomical position, and then we're going to B. So then the position in B would be extended. So if we're going from anatomical position to it's like an extended position, we would have to have extension. So extension from anatomical position.
Any questions, clarifications?
Yeah, please.
That verbiage?
So the universal flex position, the keyword is position. So we know that flexion is the motion to get there, but we want to go with position. Where's the universal? Yeah, so we're going to go flex, field position.
Because you can have flexion and not be anywhere near me. If I can have flexion to anatomical and still not be here, so it's about feeding positions.
Okay, so this question is asking about the elbows. So normally on my little scratch paper, I would write elbow, or in some cases, I would write right elbow or left elbow.
Right.
No, this. So we know at the elbows, we're gonna look just at the elbows. If we're starting from A and going to B, we have A is in a flexed position, and then we're going to I guess it's a little, it's less flexed. We'll say that. It's almost anatomical. So if we're going from a more flexed position to a less flexed position, we're gonna have extension because extended would be the position, but we're having motion in this position. So we would go with extension at the elbows. Bilateral elbow extension.
And for clarity, I'm never gonna ask, is the elbow in anatomical? And it's like, what? It's like, I'm not gonna ask that. So it doesn't matter. I think Lindsay verbalized it very well, like it's less flex. It might be a little flex, but the only way to go from being a lot of flex to a little flex is to have extension, motion down that road. Get less into field. You're getting further away from field when you have extension.
All right. So then we're gonna go with the shoulder. This is both shoulders in this case because they're doing the same thing. So there's no motion in this picture. This guy's just squat. So we would have to go with a position answer. So we know it's either gonna be extended or flexed. It's not motion. So
Does everybody understand that? Like, if someone was like, how is he not extension? And I'm like, you tell me, make you care, how do you know? What if he started coming forward and they took that picture with high resolution photo? What if he's just holding that position for the, we don't know unless there's context, right? The only thing we know to Lindsay's point is the position when we don't have enough info.
So for shoulders and hips, I like to, they pretty much do the same thing. They're the same type of joints, which is the bone joint. And they do the same thing. So this would be one, just like one motion, and then this is also like the same motion. So this is flexion because we're getting closer to fetal, and this is extension because we're getting further away. So since his shoulders are not in fetal, like he wouldn't duck for a ball in this case. So this would be extended. His shoulders would be extended in this position.
I think so too, to kind of go off that, whenever people get confused about a joint, I would say know like what it looks like at the end of its ropes. So what it looks like fully flexed, or what it looks like fully extended, and like there's clues there. If you were to like do this motion, you'll feel how different the bones here would start to feel. And look as well, look how like perfectly round this looks versus whenever you start to come up, you feel those like divots.
If you have, and tell me if y'all did this or not, but if you have your phone and you zoom in and you take a picture of that person, right? And then you take your phone, now he's kind of slunched over. You take your phone and you take a picture, and then you take your phone and you rotate your phone. You're gonna see that, well, if you rotate it more globally, you're gonna see the nuances. So again, sometimes those pictures are hard to see. That's what we're teaching. We're teaching you to see what is sometimes hard to see so that you guys can be better practitioners of people.
Right, like to his point, sometimes people will get this all day, but then there'll be a guy doing a plane or like the backwards plane. You're supporting yourself, reverse, and people will get that confused because it's not the tradition of standing up. Things like it to this point. We said it's
So you did it.
From a local perspective, so we know that it's going from this girl's perspective. But if she's, well, I would say she's abducting that.
Let's put in some context. Well, let's say she's doing jump jacks. And this is a perfectly okay question to ask on the test. If I don't give enough information, call me. I'll look at it. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It's just I've been doing this for so many years that those instances are happening less and less and less often. So she's doing jumping jacks.
So she's doing jumping jacks. For people that don't see that, I like to think about it. If you were to just take your finger, like if I had chalk or like paint, and I had my finger up against this wall doing that jumping jack, and I turned around, my circle, the way I'm spinning, is like a circle on the wall. That's frontal plane movement. Versus transverse, if I was on the ground doing these jumping jacks, I would see a circle on the ground. That circle and that circle are not the same circle, right? So we're in different planes. So if you ever get confused, I mean, kind of like trying to finish the full movement. Nobody goes jumping jacks.
I like where you're going, but do that one more time. Imagine Sarah had sparklers. You know what sparklers are? Sparklers. It's like if you were doing that and it was nighttime and you did the sparklers, you would literally see the blur of the sparklers. That's kind of what you're getting at.
Right, and then like with the snow angel, you see the circle that you left, like your infrared. Like from
Oh, I don't feel right. And the circle she's talking about, how many of you have ever seen like Price is Right? Remember they have that big wheel that catches spin? Like that's the circle, right? And like that circle, if it was here, would be sagittal. If it was a merry-go-round, it would be transverse, but that's what she's getting at, is sort of the spin.
The scalpula. Is
it's
a flat bone. So in the textbook, this is pretty much textbook question. We know that the flat bone protects. I guess it's just more like a textbook stuff. It's not much to explain because it's a book.
Yeah.
So know those easy questions because they could help you, and you don't want to get those easy questions wrong.
Right. And so like you might not have known what the scapula does or is, but if you knew that flat bone is what it is and its use, or its of importance, the scapula might throw you off, but then you're like, okay, wait, I know what's flat bone. And that would help you. Or if you think about falling, that scapula is going to protect you if you were to fall on your back. So like you can kind of break the question apart.
think of it like this, we have our eyes in front that help us a lot to protect and fade. So we don't have eyes in our back. So we're kind of having a couple of shields back there to kind of help us protect our vital organs posterior along with our ribs.
This is what I was talking about a second ago, whenever we kind of mix our rotation and our translation together. Walking, you see me walking straight, think I was translating, and my joints are moving and they're spinning so that I can walk. So walking is an example of general movement.
Take it to the extreme. If you translate without rotating, you are possessed
Right.
or magic. Right?
Can you explain that last question again?
Yeah, yeah, I can't go back to it, but
The translation rotation.
yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I got it right.
So we can't, we're not on segways, right? And even the segway, it's rolling so that we can scoot, right? We have to rotate things in order to translate ourselves. Like I have to rotate hips and ankles so that my center of mass can go across. We have to. I'm not saying other things can't translate us. An elevator can translate, but we cannot translate ourselves unless we spin things. And joint motions or human motions are the rotational components of these rotations that help us to translate. We rotate to translate. When you're doing a squat, you may coach someone going up and down, but we have to be aware that there's rotations happening at the hips and the knees. If my hips just move by themselves, I'd swing back. And if my knees just move by themselves, I'd swing forward. They have to rotate against each other so that we can translate things up, down, right, front, back. Rotate to translate.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we can do, like, I could do like a practical example to say like, I'd say like the wheels, right? The wheels on that skateboard have general motion because their spin and their shift. So if I just did like this would be pure rotation. There's spin, but there's no shift. There's no translation. This would be pure translation. And then the combination is how we move ourselves. It's the combination of rotation and translation. If the car's stuck in the mud, those wheels are spinning, but you're not going anywhere, right? We rotate to translate.
Yeah, I think so with like walking, we see how it moves, like kind of like a wheel. So if you think of how like your body, so your bicycle, it is very rotational looking. It's very much like this looking. So that's the wheels coming into play.
So, well, we know it's generally, like, why would it be pure rotation? Because it's just like,
Because you're also going to left or right or forward or
Yeah.
backwards. So if I was just doing this, this would be rotational. But because I'm moving forward.
What great explanation and great question. Because we could describe the motion both rotationally and linear. Meaning my ankle is dorsi, plantar, dorsi, plantar. But literally my ankle joint is traveling to your right, to my left, to the like I'm moving to this side of the room. That's a linear description. And then the rotation is dorsi, plantar,
so pure linear, which means,
I can't, well, a pure linear would be,
I mean, essentially black.
oh, Lord. I just falling straight down. But I still had to get myself up to fall straight down, but I can't make myself.
You know, across.
Yeah. I have to have gotten a letter from someone about a letter.
All right, we have 3 questions left and 3 minutes left, so let's run through these and just say, this is probably one of the trickier ones, so let's spend a lot real quick.
So so I know we're going with the right hip and the left hip. So as you guys, I would be looking at it like this. But if I want to know which one was the right hip and which one was the left hip, I kind of turn and kind of do her little thing. So I'll figure out that my left hip is still on the ground and my right hip is in the air. But my right hip's in the air. That does not mean motion. That means translation. So as my right hip's in the air, I can feel that my hand on my hip because we're worried about the hips, and I put this back. My hand did not move at all, while this hand kind of bent. You can tell that there was no motion in the right hip. So that means it's still an anatomical. And then the left hip kind of moved. So let's figure out what the left hip was. It was, we know that fetal, we're going to get into fetal, my hip goes up. Well, I guess it does like that. So this is the same thing as this, which is the same thing with the whole can. Sorry.
I think that would be something good, not in this moment, but later, to like actually do that motion and feel what it feels like. So you're gonna wanna be able to do that on the test.
You know this, man. She's stretching muscles there. You know you feel it. If you did this, you know darn well you feel stretch on that leg up on the ground, right? You know where you wouldn't feel a stretch? That one. It's still in the same position.
So for the questions like this on the test, and it says right hip first, we're gonna look at the right hip first and answer the right hip first. So it would be in an anatomical position, and then we work with the left. The left hip is in a flex position because we're not having motion here. So it would be this answer rather than this one because we're worried about the right one, then the left.
But that's how it can get kind of confusing, because you're looking at very similar things. This is straight from the slides. A ball and socket joint can move in blank planes about blank axes and have blank possible motions. It has the most amount of movement, 3 planes, 3 axes, therefore 6 movements. It can do all of the movements at the end of that unit. So this is it.
Was today helpful?
This one's flex.
Utilize the group, you guys, and go out if you want, but I would definitely try to get into small groups, whether it's here, at the library. Lindsay's here to help, I'm here to help, know what I don't know, so hope you guys, I think Wednesday we're gonna do real well. Good job.
Sorry, I read that.